Think about how many living things you're familiar with. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of different organisms you can name. Chances are you can identify many different vertebrate animals, as well as several kinds of invertebrate animals. You can also identify a wide variety of plants and fungi. Perhaps you can even name some microscopic organisms. Describing, identifying, classifying, and categorizing the millions of different kinds of living things on Earth is not an easy job. So how do scientists go about this process? What are some of the ways relationships between living things are identified and described? And what are the major categories into which living things are grouped? During the next few minutes, we're going to answer these questions and others as we explore the diversity of life on Earth. Our planet supports a vast and amazing diversity of life. Living things come in many shapes, forms, and sizes, ranging from tiny bacteria to animals as large as whales and elephants, to plants like giant redwood trees that stretch over 100 meters into the sky. Scientists estimate that there are over 10 million different species of living organisms on the planet, and new species are still being discovered. Throughout the history of life on Earth, it's estimated that over 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct. Can you imagine trying to study so many different species? More than 2,000 years ago, early Greeks, such as Aristotle, placed living things into two groups: plants and animals. You decide. What's the problem with this system? Having just two groups was too broad, and it didn't take into account other types of organisms that were not plants or animals. In the Middle Ages, groups called genera were systematically described using the Latin language. Today, scientists still use Latin to name organisms. In the 1750s, the Swedish biologist Carolus Linnaeus developed a method to name each species using a two-part name. For example, the name of the common housefly became Musca domestica. The name of the honeybee became Apis mellifera. Scientists still use this two-part system to name species. The process of giving each species two names, a genus name and a species name, is called binomial nomenclature. Since the time of Carolus Linnaeus, scientists began grouping species into more categories. There are 8 main taxonomic levels in the modern taxonomic hierarchy. Let's highlight these levels, going from the broadest, most inclusive, to the most specific level. Domains, of which there are 3, are the broadest taxonomic categories. Domains are broken down into kingdoms, and there are 6 of those, although some scientists argue there are fewer. Kingdoms are broken down into phyla, which are further divided into classes. Classes are broken down into orders, families, genera, and then most specifically into species. Let's see how the common housefly is classified. Going from broad to specific, the housefly is in the domain Eukarya, the kingdom Animalia, the phylum Arthropoda, the class Insecta, the order Diptera, the family Muscidae, genus Musca, and species Domestica. Each taxonomic group implies a set of characteristics common to a group of organisms within that taxon. For example, the class Insecta includes insects, which are animals that have an exoskeleton, 6 legs, a 3-part body, 2 antennae, and compound eyes. As you know, each species has a specific 2-part name, referred to as its scientific name. In everyday usage, we usually don't use scientific names to describe specific organisms. For example, this blue-colored bird is often called several different names, including blue jay, bluecoat, nest robber, and corn thief. But this bird's scientific name, Cyanocida cristata, makes it very clear what bird we're talking about. We've already mentioned that there are about 2 million known living species, with more species still being discovered. How do scientists go about identifying, describing, naming, and classifying living things? And how do they explain how organisms are related to each other? Scientists use several characteristics to help them. Among the most important is an organism's evolutionary relationship to other living things. According to the theory of evolution, new species arise or evolve from pre-existing species. Hereditary or evolutionary relationships between species play a fundamental role in describing them. Generally speaking, species that share common characteristics are thought to share common ancestral species. Systematic biology, also referred to as systematics, is the study of the diversification of life and the reconstruction of evolutionary relationships between living things. By analyzing similarities and differences between species, an evolutionary or phylogenetic tree can be constructed. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of an organism that relies on numerous types of evidence. Phylogeny is helpful in understanding how an organism is related to its ancestors and to other living things. We've already explained that systematics is the study and reconstruction of evolutionary relationships. Taxonomy involves the process of naming and categorizing organisms. While taxonomic categories should ideally reflect evolutionary relationships, taxonomists need to rely on other characteristics to classify organisms. Carolus Linnaeus based his classification strategy primarily on physical characteristics. Today, taxonomists still use physical characteristics to determine evolutionary relationships. For example, foxes, coyotes, and wolves possess many similar physical structures, including canine teeth, long legs, claws, and bushy tails. They're in the same family called Canidae. Evidence left in the form of fossils helps scientists classify not only extinct organisms, but also helps develop phylogenetic relationships of living organisms. Fossil evidence can be in the form of bones, preserved tissue, or impressions. In addition to studying physical structures, and fossil evidence, scientists also consider biochemical components. Over the years, sophisticated techniques have emerged to analyze DNA, RNA, and proteins. They help scientists to determine evolutionary relationships between living things. Scientists also use cellular information, referred to as cytological information, to help classify organisms. By examining cellular structures and comparing them, it's possible to identify similarities and differences between species. Taxonomists often use embryological evidence to help establish relationships that might not otherwise be obtained. The behaviors of living things also help distinguish species from each other. For example, some insects, such as certain crickets, can be identified solely on the basis of mating sounds that they make. The earliest classification systems placed organisms into two main groups, plants and animals. As people gained greater understanding of the natural world, classification categories consisted of more taxa. Taxonomists continue to debate and revise the way living things are classified. For many years, scientists have ascribed to either a five-kingdom or six-kingdom classification system. In the five-kingdom system, the kingdoms include bacteria, protista, plants, fungi, and animals. In the six-kingdom system, the bacteria kingdom was subdivided into two separate kingdoms, eubacteria and archaebacteria. We'll discuss those in a minute. Today, many taxonomists favor using more general categories called domains over kingdoms. The three domains consist of the domain archaea, the domain bacteria, and the domain eukarya. The three general categories of archaebacteria include methanogens, extremophiles, and non-extreme bacteria. Methanogens live in swamps, marshes, and the intestines of mammals. They obtain energy by using hydrogen gas to reduce carbon dioxide to methane gas. Extremophiles live in environments that may seem extreme to us, including hot geothermal springs, salty bodies of water, such as in Mono Lake, California, and at great pressure, deep in the oceans. Non-extreme archaebacteria live in environments similar to those where bacteria live. However, they possess DNA signatures present only in archaebacteria. The domain bacteria includes the most abundant organisms on Earth. In fact, there are more living bacteria in your mouth than there are living mammals on the planet. Microscopic bacteria are placed in 12 to 15 different groups. They're responsible for processes such as decomposition, nitrogen fixation, and photosynthesis, to name just a few. Eukaryotes, in the domain Eukarya, are organisms that possess a membrane-bound nucleus in their cells. There are four kingdoms of eukaryotes: protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Protists vary widely in form and structure, ranging from unicellular microscopic organisms to large multicellular organisms, such as kelp. Plants are multicellular organisms that possess cellulose, varying modes of reproduction, and are photosynthetic. Fungi are not capable of photosynthesis, but instead they obtain energy from living or once living things. Animals, of which humans are examples, are multicellular organisms that must obtain their energy from other once living things. During the past few minutes, we've explored the wide diversity of life on Earth, while specifically focusing on how life is described, named, and classified. We began by discussing some of the ways life forms were described and classified over 2,000 years ago. The contribution of Carolus Linnaeus in developing the two-name system for each organism, called binomial nomenclature, was highlighted. We then discussed the hierarchy of the modern classification system, consisting of 8 different taxa. We then explored some of the ways scientists go about identifying, naming, describing, classifying, and explaining how organisms are related to each other. Critical to this process is systematic biology, which is the study of the diversification of life and the reconstruction of evolutionary relationships between living things. We discussed phylogeny, the evolutionary history of an organism. Some of the other characteristics used by scientists in understanding living things were highlighted, including physical features, biochemical makeup, cytological characteristics, embryology, behavior, and fossil evidence. Last, we briefly investigated the 3 major domains that encompass the amazing diversity of life on our planet. Fill in the correct word to complete the sentence. Number 1. Over 99% of the species that lived on Earth are... Number 2. Scientists use the language to name organisms. Number 3. Carolus Linnaeus developed a two-name system for species called nomenclature. Number 4. The modern classification system is with broad categories broken down into smaller ones. Number 5. The two-part name of a species is its name. Number 6 is the study of diversification of life and the reconstruction of evolutionary relationships. Number 7. Species that have many similar characteristics are thought to share common. Number 8 is the evolutionary history of an organism. Number 9, there are 3 broad into which all life is grouped. And number 10, plants and animals are in the domain